Yeah, no one's moving. Well, if you're in the back and you can't see, you can turn around. It won't offend me if I see the back of your heads. You can't see these screens well. Well, I am here because I decided a few years ago I was not going to be the kind of person that complained about something unless I was willing to do something about it. So, after thinking, homecoming is just not special, it's just a Sunday with lunch. So last year I said, I'll be glad to do a slideshow. And Stuart goes, okay, that'll be good. So I did the slideshow, and I really wanted to talk about it, but Stuart knew I'd talk too long. And so he said, let's just play the slides. So anyway, this year I was approached to see if I would do the slideshow talking about the slides, so that's why I'm here. This is by no means an extensive history of the church. This is just my history of the church. Some of y'all gave me pictures last year. I've done some research. I've talked. I mainly use pictures that were here at the church, and I really think it's fun. I was lucky enough to grow up here, but there are a lot of y'all that grew up here that are older than me, so you know more history than I do. So if I do something wrong, just correct me later. Or do like my students and raise your hand and go, I don't think that's right. Okay, so anyway, this is our 90th year. Our church was started 90 years ago. So that's really cool, don't you think? All right, being a history teacher, we're going to see some history. According to the census report, the population of the village of Archdale increased, get this, 252% between 1920 and 1930, from 178 people that lived in Archdale to 628 people. Mr. R.C. Hassel, that's Mr. and Mrs. R.C. Hassel, and this was Carol Wallace's grandparents. And he actually had the idea that we needed another church. We had the Archdale Friends, but we needed another church. And so they discussed the situation with Reverend John Woolsey and the presiding elder of the district, Reverend W.F. Womble, and they came and preached a service at Archdale School. And they agreed with Mr. Hassel that we did need another church in Archdale. September the 6th, 1925, Archdale Methodist Episcopal Church South was officially recognized at the Fourth Quarterly Conference of Highland Methodist Episcopal Church South of High Point, North Carolina. See, we had a really long name because the Methodist Church originally in the United States was the Methodist Episcopal Church. But in the mid-1800s, the southern states broke away because of slavery, because the Southern Methodists wanted to be able to have slaves. And so we took the name the Methodist Episcopal Church South, and that was still our name. 20 charter members began the congregation under the founding pastor, the Reverend E.M. Jones, and he was the pastor at Highland, so we want to charge with Highland. Services were initially held in the Archdale Public School building. This is it. It was called Bush Hill Academy. The first Sunday school was held in the afternoon, and Dan Warren told me the reason it was in the afternoon is Archdale Friends was holding theirs on Sunday morning, and so we held our Sunday school on Sunday afternoon. The first attendance of Sunday school was 50 people, and the collection was $3.01. The average attendance for the first quarter was 55, but with Reverend Jones, the attendance for Sunday school grew to 187. I mean, that's a good number for us now, 187 by the year 1933. On Easter morning, 1926, the trustees bought this land. They bought the site where the church stands. D.H. Baker was the architect and the contractor. He had built Ward Street Methodist, and we used the same blueprints as Ward Street Methodist. The foundation was laid in the spring of 1927, and the building was completed in November 1927. A well-known auctioneer at that time, Mr. George Penny, gave a bell to the church that they could use. The church opened with a great revival that added many new members. Now, I just heard Peggy saying we were doing a new yearbook, and I went, oh, no. Did y'all do that too? Be honest, because nobody wants to come have their picture made. But this is the first yearbook, and I don't have a copy of it, but I have a copy of it, okay? The church has a copy, and you can see it's got our name on the front. And I counted, we had 99 members in 1928, 99 members. Our church was a charged church with Highland, with the Reverend Jones preaching. We had preaching on the second and fourth Sundays of the month. And we had Sunday school every Sunday. There was a prayer meeting on Tuesday night. I guess Highland got prayer meeting on Wednesday night. So we got it on Tuesday night. And the Epworth League met on Sundays at 7:30. And the Epworth League was a young adult association for ages 18 to 35. The Board of Trustees built a church for $20,000 without any money, except for small gifts from supporters and determined people. They asked money from everyone in the community, and I thought that was interesting. Not just the people that went here, they went to the community and asked people to give money. And nearly everyone gave some money. Most people gave a small amount because that's all they could. Some people would take out a business loan, a small business loan, and they gave it to the church for the building. The trustees were Reverend O.L. Elder, R.C. Hassel, F.B. Lindley, Eugene Marsh, and E.L. Varner. Listen to this, because this was 1925, and you know what happened 4 years later. Great Depression started. And it said, despite the Depression years, the church always met all of their financial obligations. In 1939, the Methodist Episcopal Church South and the Methodist Episcopal Church reunited to become the Methodist Church. In 1939, all of the debts were paid off from the church, and a dedication service was held October the 8th, 1939. The service was announced in the North Carolina Christian Advocate, and I have a copy of that, which is where I got a lot of this information. Reverend R.C. Kirk, and that's his picture, was the minister, and the Christian Advocate says, listen to this, quotes, no pastor had ever had as congenial and cooperative official board to work with. Dana wants that. The first parsonage, now I thought some of you may not know that the house beside Ernestine's was the first parsonage. So the first parsonage was bought in 1946 with a special dedication service on Sunday afternoon, June the 2nd, 1946. Reverend William Penny was the pastor. An 11-classroom educational building was added in 1954 at a cost of $25,350. This addition was paid off 3 years later, March 21st, 1957, and a dedication service was held October 13th, 1957. A few years later, additional land was bought at the back of the church on Penny Street for further expansion. In 1961, the congregation felt the need for an additional wing of Sunday school classrooms, where our Sunday school classrooms are now. They put $15,000 in the budget for the new building, and they added to it every month. In the spring of 1962, the building committee submitted plans for the new building, which were approved by the congregation. The building was started July 1962 and finished in December 1962. The new addition plus was in excess of $60,000, with the furnishings. The fellowship hall is the little white building to the side that was enlarged and redecorated with the addition of a modern kitchen.
Cheryl, that was the hut.
That's right. That's what I was going to say. Yeah. It was called the hut. Yeah. At the same time, classrooms in the older educational building were painted and furnishings were added. Now, I know you can't see this, but I wanted you to see that in the High Point Enterprise, they had an article, and they had that picture that you just saw. It was on Sunday, April the 7th, 1963, and it announced an open house at our church so people could see the hut and the new educational wing from 2:30 to 5 o'clock. In July 1963, the parking lot was hard-topped. So we had a hard-top parking lot, and Reverend Ernest Page was the preacher at the time. On Sunday, August the 14th, 1966, the congregation approved plans for a complete remodeling of this sanctuary, and they wanted to add a steeple tower. The remodeling of the sanctuary and the furnishings were completed in February 1967 at an excess of $100,000. Okay, that's the first Sunday with the dedication, and I love that picture. And if you can't see very well, it's packed. The church is packed. That's standing in the back, and there's a whole line of chairs across this. So I'd like to see us like that on Sunday. The first opening and consecration service was held on March 12th, 1967. The first minister, Reverend E.M. Jones, came back to preach the service. It was also Girl Scout Sunday. So this is my favorite picture. And if you can't see, I'm sorry, because I love this picture. On the second row of the Girl Scouts, my mother's sitting, and I'm sitting right behind her, and it looks just like Susanna. Yeah. So it was also Girl Scout Sunday. In 1967, the church bought the property across the street from the parking lot known as the Larker property for further expansion. Today, it's our parking lot. In 1968, the Methodist Church merged with the Evangelical United Brethren Church to form the United Methodist Church. So we've been the United Methodist Church since 1968. Land was bought for a new parsonage in 1975, located at 3511 Garrell Street. The 2,500-foot square home was dedicated on May the 26th, 1985. On Sunday, June 24th, 1984, the congregation voted to purchase the Frank and Percy Payne property. So when you say we're having pumpkins on the Payne property, that was Mr. and Miss Payne's house. And it was a beautiful house. It was one of the oldest in Archdale. And they had a little porch that they always kept unlocked, and they kept a key to the church hanging on a nail. So if you got to church and you needed to get in and you didn't have your key, you just went to the Paynes and opened their little porch and went in and got the key. They were wonderful, wonderful people. We purchased their house for $64,500, and the Payne house was demolished on September the 13th, 1988. On October 1st, 1989, the church voted to purchase more property behind the present fellowship hall that connects with Freeman Place. And now, thanks to Take Two and the Jeff Patterson class, I think it's some other people, we have a playground there. The church decided to build a new fellowship hall at a cost of $465,000. There was much discussion as to the practicality of building something this large and borrowing that much money. And that's about the time that I came back here in 1992, and everyone was trying to decide whether we were going to do it or not. I personally knew we had to because the Friends had just built one, and we wanted one slightly bigger. Yes, that was discussed. Anyway, a lot of people were against it. They just thought that was too much. It was too much money. It was too big, and we didn't need it. Interestingly enough, when I was looking back over papers, they called it a venture in faith. The fellowship hall with new offices, youth rooms, kitchen, restrooms, and community room was completed in late May 1995. Now, we're going to need this venture of faith. Okay, a terrible day, June 30th, 1998. A tornado-like storm tore off the roof of the educational building, requiring a complete restoration of our Sunday school rooms. Children's classes met in mobile trailers on the Payne property, and get this, all the adult Sunday school rooms met in our great big new fellowship hall that we had room for because we took that venture in faith, and we met there. We were knocked down, but we were not knocked out. And if you can look, that picture is what it looked like. If you got to stand upstairs, first we couldn't go upstairs because they had to see if it was structurally sound. And when they decided it was structurally sound, I walked up the steps, and I was just so sad. You know, it's just like one of your friends had died because you were standing there and you could see the sky. You know, the roof was gone. When someone called my mom's house that day, I was there, and Susanna was like a year and a half old, and the first thing they said was, "Your parsonage is gone." And I said, "Our parsonage in Westwood?" They said, "No, your parsonage beside the church." So I was thinking of the brick building. So I grabbed Susanna, put her in her car seat, and Mom and I came up. I went, "Well, that old parsonage is fine." And then I saw Ernestine's house. And it looked like, that's Ernestine's house. It looked like a pile of rubbish. It was terrible to look at. And when I got out of the car and started running, and people said, "Ernestine's okay, Ernestine's okay," because that's the first thing I thought was, how can anybody be okay when they're in that house? But underneath the debris, her house was still intact. In December of 1998, we suffered another loss. 1998 was a hard year for our church. The sudden loss of our choir director and our Sunday school superintendent the same week. This was an extremely difficult time for our church, but we bonded together. Despite the insurance gave us $500,000, we had to pay an additional $300,000 to bring the building up to code. But the community open house for our newly rebuilt and beautifully refurbished educational wing was held on June 25th, 2000, and that's Mabel Murray, who is helping with the ribbon cutting. She was our last charter member for a long time, and we cherished Mabel. We put her in as much as we could because we were so proud of her. Today, we honor our founders, like Mr. and Mrs. R.C. Hassel and their 4 children, who were second-generation church leaders. This picture was in the Enterprise to honor the pioneers of our church. These members of the men's Bible class were all 90 years old or above. They were all married for 60 or more years, and they had all been a member of the church for an average of 54 years. When the men's Bible school class began, their official name was the Young Men's Bible Class. Later, they dropped the young. Generations have attended here. This is called the Intermediate Senior Class. The Intermediate Senior Class in 1954. Our clothing and hairstyles have changed, but we're here for the same reason. This is the senior high class in the early 1970s. And I'm standing on the second row. Marcia Guffey's on the front row looking the same as she does now. Kathy Hunt's on the second row. And Leslie Lowe, our teacher. And Leslie, at least he wasn't wearing a leisure suit. This is an adult class in the 1940s, and you can see they're standing on the front porch, and they've got their hats on and their gloves. They're just really dressed up being at church. This is another senior class in the next generation. This is later going to be the friendship class. And this is the 1970s. They're standing on the porch. 1960s, our youth choir. This is our youth choir. And in the 1960s, even though we're all dressed up in our white and our little red knots at our throat, we sang "Away in a Manger." And the next generation sings "Away in a Manger." Yeah, there's Susanna and Ben and Matthew and, Brooke, Lindsay. Today, we'd like to recognize Leonard Stroud, who is the person with the longest church membership. Leonard joined the church in 1936, and his brother Lewis was not far behind him. So, we love you. The growth of the building and property since 1925 demonstrates the faith this congregation had and still has in our community. Our church began to serve the people in Archdale and in our community, and we have opened our doors through the years to Boy and Girl Scouts, as well as AA meetings. With the addition of Neighborhood Cafe, we are continuing to reach out to our community and bring the hope of Jesus to our neighbors. Through every conceivable situation or challenge, the members of this church have shown the love of Jesus to individuals, families, and communities. But this is the building, this is not the people. So I want you, please, I was going to say stand up, but I'll just say raise your hand if you're a member of this church. Raise your hand. All right, you can look around. Okay. Raise your hand if you were married here in this church. That's important. Raise your hand if you were baptized in this church. Raise your hand if you had a baby or a child that was baptized in this church. Raise your hands if you grew up in this church. So you can see how important this church has been through the ages. So today was a day to look back, but we have to talk about our future too. Today we're celebrating our history, but what will our future be? I think our church is in a time of transition, and we need to bind together and be the church of Jesus. So today I have a challenge for us. We need to increase our church attendance. We need to get our congregation back to church on Sunday morning. Let's make it a priority to be at church. Call people in your Sunday school class and tell them that they need to be back in church. Call people you haven't seen recently and remind them that we miss them. We have been the first church over the Randolph County line for 90 years. I personally want us to be here at least 90 more years and beyond. We owe it to the founders, to the 20 charter members, to the people that gave money during the Great Depression and built a church from scratch. We owe it to the people that stepped out in faith and enlarged our sanctuary and then filled it up on the dedication Sunday. Our church has changed over the years, and it will continue to change to fill the needs of the community. We must bind together and be strong for the future. God put the need for a church in the heart of our founders. And that need has to be in our hearts to join together with our brothers and sisters in Christ, to come here and to praise, to worship, and gain strength for your life. What will members of the church say about us 90 years from today? Will they look to 2015 as a year when we bound together as a church and our love for each other spilled out of this sanctuary into the community in such a way that Archdale United Methodist Church gained strength and membership and brought many people to Christ, leading new generations to follow in our footsteps? Our closing hymn for today says what I think the founders and generations of church members through the last 90 years felt and what I hope we feel. Blessed be the tie that binds our hearts in Christian love. The fellowship of kindred minds is like to that above. When we asunder part, it gives us inward pain, but we will still be joined in heart and hope to meet again. I hope to meet you here next Sunday and every Sunday. Happy homecoming.